It's a special address by uh, Dr. Siddharth Mallavarapu, Professor, School of Humanities and Social Sciences of Shiv Narar University. He will be addressing us on making sense of the world on a topic which is called Making Sense of the World, Theorizing the Realm of the International. It's a 10 to 15 minute deliberation, special address by Dr. Mallavarapu. So once the stage is ready, I would request you to kindly take the seat. And you can use the seat or the podium, whichever you like. Thank you. Yeah, we're good to go. If you could kindly come up. Thank you. Can I request the audience to kindly settle down? The next session is starting. Audience, if you could kindly settle down, please. Starting. Dr. Mallavarapu is waiting. Yep, thank you.
Thank you. At the outset, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Rising Asia Foundation and the Bengal Chambers of Commerce and Industry for the warm invitation to this event. A specific word of thanks to Dr. Harish Mehta, the founding chairman of the Rising Asia Trust and the editor-in-chief of the Rising Asia Journal, and to Mr. Anurag Lahiri as well, the former president of the Bengal Chambers of Commerce and Industry. I'll sort of assume a slightly different tack for this session. I think what we've done in the previous sessions is we've zoomed into various facets of thinking about India and its attempt to sort of work out a larger footprint in world politics. As an academic, I see my task as largely one of asking questions. And we don't often have easy bromides or solutions necessarily to those questions. A number of key words were mentioned in the earlier session. We talked about economic sovereignty, multilateralism, power transitions, and geopolitical alignments. All of this lends itself to what we recognize in the academic world as theorizing. Theory, I think, has several connotations and it conjures several images. But I think fundamentally what we're interested in is also to make sense of the world. And I think all of us, whether we recognize it or not, are theorists of one kind or the other. We have a certain set of assumptions about how we think about the world. Some of these are latent, they're not necessarily fleshed out. But sometimes we have fairly explicit assumptions about world politics as well. Some of you might be convinced that realists, political realists in international relations get most of the story correct when they suggest that what matters in world politics is material power, material capabilities, both in terms of economic capabilities as well as strategic capabilities, determine the standing of a state in world politics. There are others who would suggest that perhaps that is only a part of the story. Institutions matter. International organizations matter. They shape political outcomes in all sorts of ways. And they also, in a sense, influence the manner in which world politics unfolds. Another set of scholars might suggest that what matters really ultimately is the power to define narratives in world politics. The power of definition determines how we view the world. So international relations traditionally as a discipline has very often been linked to the fortunes of the major powers. If it was 19th century Britain, 20th century post-Second World War, it is the United States, which in a sense shapes the vocabulary of international relations. And some argue that the current moment and that perhaps going into the 21st century, we will be more interested in Asian voices in international relations. There is an interesting set of arguments about the receptivity to forms of knowledge and the economic standing of states. So one reason why I think there is greater interest about how China views the world is partly to do, or fundamentally to do, also with China's material presence on the world stage. So I think it's important perhaps to think about also how knowledge is received at different places and at different times, and how this is sometimes tethered to the economic strength of the particular nation states, which are in a sense also producing particular kinds of scholarship which are associated with thinking about the notion of the international. What I intend to do in the next few minutes is to address 5 sets of questions. I'll just sort of flag them because we have limited time, and I am a little intimidated, I must say, by that bell, which will screech in a little while. So the first question really is, what is theory? You know, we all have certain notions of what theory is, but theory fundamentally is interested in discerning broader patterns at work in social, political, and economic life. James Rosenau, a scholar, once suggested one way to think of theory is to ask, of what is this an instance? What does this exemplify, this particular moment we find ourselves in? Does it represent a certain pattern, a certain understanding of something which might recur in the future? Are there analogies from the past we can draw on to understand the present moment? So those are questions we need to ask fundamentally as theorists. Third, theorists are interested in generating systematic knowledge in a particular domain. They want to go beyond information, beyond mere information. If you think of any discipline, whether it's in the natural sciences, physical sciences, the humanities and social sciences, there is no discipline without a certain theoretical sense of that discipline. Theory lends spine to a particular field of study, and all fields of study have a theoretical dimension. Further, one important caveat: there is no single quintessential theory that explains the world, and this is perhaps more true of international relations than is any other field. We need to understand complex motivations better, and to do this, sometimes we have to rely on a whole range of allied knowledge systems to understand what is really determining the flow of foreign policy, for instance, or how the world works in specific domains. Does the realm of security behave very differently from the realm of economic institutions? How can we think about whose interests theorizing really serves? These are some questions which anybody inclined to understand theory thinks about. Second, what constitutes good theory? Are there a set of yardsticks by which we can make certain basic judgments about whether something is robust in terms of how we think about the world and whether it fails us in the task it seeks out to explain? So the first quality, Stephen Van Evera, a scholar, identified 8 characteristics or ingredients of thinking about theory and what constitutes robust theorizing. I'll run over these criteria because I think they might provide us one particular perspective on what constitutes good theory. The first, of course, is good theories have large explanatory power. They seek to explain the world, and they seek to explain a particular domain they have identified as important within the remit of that particular theory. Second, there has to be a certain degree of importance which we accord to certain phenomena. Not everything is worth theorizing and thinking about. We need to think about causes which have a larger impact or resonance in the manner in which a particular domain operates. Third, there is a dimension of applicability. Good theory is ultimately built on good empirics. Theories are also seen as desirable, are seen sometimes as parsimonious, which means that they tend to, in a sense, identify a certain set of variables which they regard as important and try to be elegant and also explain in a fairly persuasive manner a particular domain of behavior. Good theories satisfy our curiosities. They're clearly framed. They are in principle falsifiable. They may be true or untrue. And finally, theories also have a certain degree of prescriptive potential, or sometimes a theorist who may have spent time thinking about a particular domain may also suggest what is the best way to move forward in that domain. Now, why should we bother about theorizing world politics at this particular moment in time? I have 12 propositions which I'll quickly state here for your consideration. The first proposition is that theories are not infallible. We have a whole range of theories in international relations which are referred to as grand theories. So realism is one such theoretical framework which suggests that all of human history can be understood as an iteration of interests and power. Now, this is helpful to a certain extent because you then tend to focus on what constitutes power in a particular age and time and what constitutes interest. But we also know that there is a preference today for what is called as middle range theorizing. Grand theories don't necessarily explain certain puzzles we may be interested in understanding. I think earlier in this prior session, I think there was Dr. Sanjay Katuria who mentioned that democracy is not inimical to economic growth. So that's a good example of what a middle range theorizing does. It might want to make a connection between regime types, democracies, autocracies, and economic growth, for instance. Are democracies more conducive to economic growth, durable economic growth? Are authoritarian regimes more conducive to economic growth? How can we think of these relationships? The second proposition is there is sometimes a lag between our theoretical frameworks and real-world events. There's an element of catch-up in a complex world that scholars are often expected to do. The third proposition is that every discipline has a core nucleus. International relations has been fundamentally interested in this question of what causes war. And I think wars are still very much with us as we speak in the 21st century. Fourth, every discipline has an official story to tell, and international relations is no different in this regard. We are coming to terms today with some of the conspicuous absences in this story. So for instance, a figure like Churchill, who is revered in the standard narrative of the discipline, will not be treated as an important figure from our perspective because if we know all the terrible things which led to what was called the Bengal famine. And Churchill was instrumental in that particular terrible set of events which followed as a consequence of his actions. So there are a whole range of revisionist histories which look at figures like Woodrow Wilson, Churchill being one of them, and sort of rewrite and rethink our assumptions about these figures and their role in world politics. The other important problem very often was that Europe was considered the palimpsest by which we think about the world. And very often, as the Indian historian Deepesh Chakrabarti argued, provincial histories masqueraded as universal histories. So there is, again, effort now to rethink how we think about the histories of the world itself and where we think of our place in those histories. Fifth, every discipline has its quarters of parochialism. International relations is notorious for its Anglo-American parochialism, and the challenge, of course, is to overcome it without lapsing into our own version of parochialism. Sixth, international relations today is a much broader constellation. It includes a variety of perspectives. We have a whole range of critical approaches which make gestures to important areas, thinking about questions of race, thinking about questions of class, thinking about questions of caste, and thinking about questions of gender more critically. Seventh, the onus on scholars in the global south is not to merely critique, but to also offer constructive perspectives that could potentially complement and at moments supplant prior notions of global justice, global order, or political legitimacy. The proposition 8 I have to suggest here is that decolonization remains an incomplete project in many knowledge formations. International relations is no exception in this regard. A ninth proposition relates to this question of tracking systemic change. Can international relations improve its capacity to predict and connect the dots in terms of a complex mix of variables and devise a better set of analytical questions to think about how we can make sense of the world? Given the global shift in power, what we can do is create an alternative almanac of ideas, resources, texts, figures to study from international relations from the global south, which will act in some ways as a corrective to the silences of mainstream international relations. Proposition 11, there is a certain blurring today of the categories of the domestic and the international. We need to have a heuristic that accounts better for interlinkages between these two facets of politics. I think I'll sort of more or less conclude here. I think, can we do theory differently from this part of the world? We can do theory differently from this part of the world if we also think about a whole range of endeavors in more recent times which allow us to think more closely about decolonizing knowledge systems. global history, global political thought, global international relations, provides us some particular vantage points to interrogate the category of the global and to ask ourselves what the global obscures. What does it include, but also what does it exclude? The world is not a clean tabula rasa. There are imperial and colonial continuities even in the contemporary world we live in. And it's important for us to account better for uneven development. Perhaps I'll end with a remark Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian writer, made when he was asked what was his hope for the 21st century. And he said, my hope is that there is a better balance of stories. And I think we need to have a better balance of stories as well when we think about international relations and the Indian participation in this global conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mallavarapu. That was phenomenal to hear. May I kindly request Dr. Harish Mehta to kindly come up to the stage and do the honors to Dr. Mallavarapu.